Great. So welcome everybody to this session, which is actually very complementary to the one we had yesterday on the humanitarian reset and the consultation. The focus here is really about the transformation of humanitarian practices to better serve populations today and tomorrow. And here the focus will very much be around the greening. So not necessarily the programmatic approaches, the anticipatory action, but really the greening aspects. I'll just say a few words. Sorry, slides. It doesn't work. Okay, so the objectives of this session is very much about reaffirming the sector's environmental and climate commitments. We know it's a very shaky moment in the sector because of priorities, of explosion of needs, of funding cuts, and there's a risk for climate and biodiversity commitments to be sidelined in this particular context. So we think it's extremely important to have a discussion about reaffirming these commitments in the coming period, looking at priorities, but also the very many co-benefits and benefits of a greener and decarbonized approach, including for populations and many other aspects such as efficiency gains, etc. And the idea here is to also shed light on practical examples that we'll go through with our 4 panelists that I'll present just in a few minutes. Okay, have next. So a few words on the Climate Action Accelerator for those who don't know us. We're a non-for-profit initiative based in Geneva. We focus on accelerating the deployment of climate solutions within organizations that provide essential services to populations, with a very strong focus on aid, but also health, higher education, research. And we do this, maybe next, Samantha. We do this with our partners, about 40 partners on board of the initiative, with whom we have privileged collaborations, some big international organizations and NGOs, but also, and we're very happy about this, about half of our partners are national NGOs, Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, notably Bangladesh. And you'll see among the panelists, we're privileged to have a representative of the Bangladesh Red Crescent Society that I'll present later. Next. We work through an acceleration model which is based on pilot roadmaps, pilot technical projects. From there, we extract knowledge, and maybe, can we go back, please? And then we reinforce capacities and engage systemic actors to try to ground climate, environment, and action in policies and frameworks. Next. So I'd like to just provide a bit the frame of this conversation, which is important. So I think here in the room, everyone is convinced that climate and biodiversity crisis is a critical emergency, which is not there to go away. It's going to impact all the coming decades in front of us. It's aggravating. On the same hand, we have an explosion of humanitarian needs, which is linked to many factors, among which climate, but obviously geopolitical instability, conflict, and other aspects with shrinking funding. And the big question humanitarian actors are facing is how basically can they deliver their mission, their assistance to populations, meet growing needs, while learning how to operate within planetary boundaries and within a context of limited resources. And it's this really fundamental question that we have to address collectively. It's also about becoming fit for purpose for the future. We believe climate and nature transformation actually strengthens humanitarian action rather than rather than actually presents, I would say, diminishes the capacity to provide assistance to populations because of operational benefits that we'll see with our panelists, also because of strengthening localization, efficiency, gaining resilience in this world. Next. A few facts to recall before we start the conversation. So we actually did in 2024, we published an estimation of what were the emissions of the sector. It wasn't a measurement, but an estimation. So can we go back, please? The estimation was about 35 million tons in 2022, which is both small and a lot. It's small compared to the world emissions, but actually there's no actor which is particularly large when you individually, when you talk about world emissions. It represents more, for example, than the emissions of the whole public health sector in the UK. So just to give an idea of what it represents, and it would represent the emissions of a city of about 4.5 million inhabitants in Western Europe, basically, with all the consumption of all the inhabitants, okay? In terms of intensity, it's quite an intensive sector, which is normal because it does international deployment of goods, of people and services. And it's actually at least as intensive as the manufacturing sector, for example. Next. We know when we look at activities, we know that the emissions of the sector come predominantly from certain types of activities, which are not fully a surprise when we know about humanitarian activities. So food and agriculture is almost half of the emissions. So this is very much in the, in the camp of big players like WFP, like ICRC, and all the implementing actors. Another big quarter is health and nutrition. And finally, we have a number of other sources of emissions, which are linked, obviously, to water and sanitation, emergency shelter, etc., and a few others, okay? But it's important to have these proportions in mind when we talk about priority setting. Thank you. The top solutions on decarbonization, and here this is not about the full environmental impact, but on decarbonizations, the top solutions are extremely well identified. I mean, there's no, I think, sorry, can we go backwards? Yeah. There are probably three that are predominant that must be tackled. It's the switch to renewable energy by default in the field, everywhere it's possible. It's about controlling the use of air transport, so both travel and air freight. And finally, it's the switch to supply practices, procurement practices, which privilege low carbon suppliers and low carbon products. I mean, these are really the top levers that if we want to be effective in this area, this is what we have to address. And this probably is 80 to 90% of the impact. Next. We've also done a few financial estimations. Again, so we're not going to go into the details, but basically our estimation of the average cost of action is around between 0 and 1% of the annual budget of organizations. It's sometimes less than that. Sometimes it's a bit more. There's a lot of areas where you have savings, others where you need investment, but it really breaks the myth of unaffordability of climate and environment solutions. And when you go into the details, you actually see that the main challenge is more around, I would say, human skills and attention and strategic determination rather than the finance. Next. Co-benefits, we'll go through it. Efficiency, operational resilience, enhancement of capacity to deliver assistance through localizations, better quality programs, acceptance by local communities. a lot of these actions are actually legitimate on their own for these reasons, besides their climate and environmental impact, and that should probably be the driver in terms of priority setting. And maybe next, I'll just like to end this little introduction on highlighting what recommendations came of the sectoral roadmap we issued in 2024, and notably the recommendations for donors, who are, of course, very key players as they fund many programs around the world with many partners, including UN agencies. So the recommendation here was first, for donors to operationalize their own climate commitments, notably on their program portfolio, which is how basically they select and build the projects and integrate the climate dimension, combining incentives and requirements, financial support and capacity building for organizations, adjusting funding frameworks for organizations to be able to mainstream, and focusing on humanitarian supply chains as a top priority, because this is where there's a massive contribution to both local environmental degradation, but also emissions. So I'll stop there and I'll basically present our speakers. So we're very privileged today to have André Krummacher from ACTED, who is the director of programs, excuse me. So we're very privileged because he took the time to join us while being extremely busy these days. And ACTED has a strong record on climate and environment commitments. So André will explain us how this is done. We then have Mosleh Uddin from the Bangladesh Red Crescent Society, who's joining us from Dhaka online, and will be the Bangladesh Red Crescent Society has, is in a position where it actually faces some of the toughest challenges when it comes to climate adaptation and resilience, but it is also working on greening its response at the same time, with already a number of actions in place. And Mohammed will explain us why this is important from a national actor's point of view. We then have, we're happy to welcome Julia Stewart-David, who is an advisor to the Director General of ECHO, with a focus on the climate and environment subject, among others, who's joining us from Brussels. And we have also Alexandra Kappeler, who's on my left at the table, who represents the Swiss Development Cooperation Agency and the Humanitarian Division, and is in charge and carrying the climate and environment commitment and dossier. And we'll be happy to hear you, Alexandra. Finally, we have, excuse me, David. David. Daniel Pfister, sorry. So who's joining us, who represents OCHA, the OCHA team in New York. So here for the week in Geneva, and in charge of climate. You'll tell us more about your work today, very much associated also to the Humanitarian Reset discussions. Great. So I'll start with André. So André, you're heading the programs of a large international NGO, the question I'd like to ask you is: there's often a perception that there's a trade-off between climate and environment commitments and actually assistance to populations, and there's sometimes this representation that you can't do both, or it's one at the cost of the other. So I'd like to ask you. So first, is that true? Have you been facing these types of dilemma, and what's been the case for ACTED in practice? And could you well, provide examples of how, your climate work has reinforced the quality of your assistance to populations, and where do you see, well, the benefits of going in this direction? Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno. All very good and important question. Morning, everyone. By the way, I will come to some of the examples that you have asked for, but maybe before I wanted to start to say that at Acted that I would say this is part of now our organizational DNA for the last 5 to 7 years, where we strongly believe that addressing humanitarian and human suffering and addressing the planetary suffering, because we have a climate crisis that is making the planet suffer, are two sides of the same coin. And the climate crisis is amplifying humanitarian needs, and the people we serve are at the front line of both crises now. Humanitarian crisis and climate and planetary crisis. So for this reason, we do not believe there is a trade-off between humanitarian quality programming and environmental protection and greening. And actually, on the contrary, integrating climate and environmental action has consistently improved the reliability, the relevance, and also cost effectiveness of our humanitarian response. Climate-smart approaches help us serve communities better today while protecting the foundations of their well-being tomorrow. That's very, very important, and I will come back to this. And yeah, let me go to a few examples. I do have some programming ones though, so I'm not only on the greening side, what we call enacted, let's say more the back office function, because we think the back office function goes quite often hand in hand with programming, what we do in terms of programming, especially since supply chain and procurement are such huge sources of emissions. And here, the procurement and the supply chain is obviously very much linked in terms of what we are doing in the field. So maybe the first example is energy and solarization of life-saving services. In a lot of context, we have been for years now solarizing water pumping systems. I think a lot of actors have switched to this, as well as other critical community infrastructure. And we see that this brings basically 3 major quality uplifts. So on the one hand, operational costs have dropped depending on the context, between 30 to 70%, allowing us to redirect scarce budgets these days into expanded service coverage. The systems are more reliable if they don't have to run on diesel, because they are not dependent on diesel supply chains that can be quite often disrupted by insecurity or by price spikes as we see it currently. And to some extent, we also reduce protection risk linked to fuel transport in contested areas. So if you look at what are the quality, in terms of solarization of key infrastructure, what are the quality uplifts for the people? So on the one hand, safe, more reliable access to water in the example I gave. And there is a clear quality uplift for the planet, reduced emissions and reduced diesel dependence. But beyond solarization, we are also shifting now and trying to go away from constructing and repairing water points to take a more systems approach to water management. I think we have to stop making Swiss cheese out of some contexts where there is continuous where there is continuous drilling and construction of new water points, and we really need to look at watershed management and groundwater recharge these days, because in the long term we need to make sure our response is durable and more resilient to climate stress, and we need to reduce unsustainable aquifer offtake and ensure long-term water access. So that's one example. another one, sorry, still on the programming side, but I come to the back office. The same in terms of food security and livelihoods, which you have also said. In terms of the carbon footprint you have shown before, is quite a huge emission factor. We are working more and more in drought-affected regions, like in the Sahel, in East Africa, with farmers to work more on climate-resilient crops, improved water and soil management, rangeland restoration and agroecology, and drought-tolerant seed systems. So the idea is to maintain food production during dry seasons or during erratic climate patterns. And again, if we look at what is the quality uplift for people, ideally fewer families fall back into emergency food insecurity, reducing negative coping strategies, and the quality uplift for the planet, healthier soils, water retention, protected ecosystems. So this is really forward-looking and more effective humanitarian response. Now, yes, climate action does not stop with the programs. It also improves how we operate internally. So in 2025, we put a decarbonization roadmap into place in the organization that aims to reduce our emissions across logistics, fleet, energy use, procurement, etc. I think it's very clear this matters because as humanitarians, we cannot contribute to the climate crisis that ultimately harms people that we are meant to be serving. So concretely, you spoke also about it, the switch to renewable energy by default, to have more energy efficient field bases with lower fuel needs that will allow us to redirect some of the support costs rather into programs. And as an example, a couple of years ago, we solarized our full Islamabad office. And because energy in Pakistan is so expensive, the system was amortized within 1 year, which is quite incredible, I think, in Europe. And you have a solar system at your house, you look at 10, 12 years, that's a relatively good amortization. So 1 year, and we are now almost done with all our field office network in terms of solarization. Then the other side is procurement. Very, very important, and supply chains. So especially on the construction sites, since the last 2 years, we are promoting now more and more bioclimatic design principles to reduce the use of cement, which has quite a high emission factor, and also CGI sheets. Plus, these type of buildings are not very nice when you build schools, let's say in camp or in displacement settings, and they become very hot and uncomfortable. They are not very good learning environments, and this has really cut our emissions. So basically, on the operations side, basically lower emissions, less waste, sustainable resource use, ensuring we do not contribute to the climate impacts driving humanitarian needs. And last but not least, last example is that climate action is transforming also our partnerships and financing model. It's maybe where more people are going to listen these days, given the financial crisis. But ACTID is now accredited to the Green Climate Fund, which is quite a significant point for us because it also allows us to channel climate financing to fragile and conflict-affected contexts where it has historically struggled to reach. We are starting our first GCF-funded programs this year in Chad, in Syria, and in Libya. Some of these are the world's most climate-vulnerable environments, yet they don't receive a lot of climate finance. So by bridging the humanitarian action, by bridging the gap between humanitarian action and climate finance, we can also bring multi-year predictable resources, because it's also true most of the humanitarian budget cycles are unfortunately still annual. and it's very hard to plan on these cycles into communities that are facing conflict and climate shock. So again, here, clear quality uplift for people, stable multi-year funding that strengthens their resilience, and quality uplift for the planet, larger scale investment in adaptation and mitigation and risk reduction. So for us, to close, climate action is not an optional agenda. We really see it as a catalyst for better humanitarian action. It improves, as I was saying in the examples, reliability, it reduces costs, it enhances dignity, it expands partnership and brings longer-term financing into some of the most fragile environments. And ultimately, humanitarian action and climate action, as I was saying also at the beginning, it's going together. It's protecting, on the one hand, it's protecting people and their ecosystems they rely on. So for us, and I hope everyone in the room agrees, I think we can say by integrating and by going green and integrating climate action into the humanitarian response, it's basically essentially about delivering better aid, not only today, but also for tomorrow. Thank you.
So thank you, André. That was a very passionate and convincing breakdown of what you do. I just want to just a short question, short answer. Have you been exposed to dilemmas where you actually had to put aside a climate and environment action or ambition because it was actually confronting you to the question of assistance? And because this is the argument you often hear from many organizations. So would you say that it's a totally imaginary dilemma, or have you actually faced some of these hard choices?
Yeah, we had we had an issue in Somalia a couple of years ago during the drought, but actually the push came from the donor to put it aside. And we had a different view, and we had an argument basically, and we tried to negotiate, and we said we should rather use. It was about should we just be unconditional cash, or can we do some conditional cash to include also some climate action in it? So there was a huge argument basically around it. We couldn't find a solution in it, but I would say. I don't want to point necessarily that's always to the donor, but this comes really to my mind right now because there was within the donor policy there was basically no opening between conditional and unconditional cash, and because of the crisis, it was kind of said it should be only unconditional cash, and therefore we had to put it aside. Yeah.
Thank you. So now we'll turn ourselves to Mosleh Uddin from the Bangladesh Red Crescent Society in Dhaka. So as I said, the Bangladesh Red Crescent Society is probably one of the most experienced organizations in the world when it comes to working on adaptation and resilience facing the climate challenge. It's a big organization, many projects, lots of operational experience, but also making the choice of greening its response currently on top of all the other programmatic approaches. So I'd like to ask you, Mosleh Uddin, so in what way do you see your green response approach as helping your organizations to better address the needs of the population? I mean, where do you see the relation between the two? Why you've chosen to work on this subject as a national organization, and where do you see the links with also adaptation and resilience? So how do both support each other? And would you like to convey any important messages to the participants here in this session, and whether it's donors, whether it's other organizations on this subject? So I give the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno. Thank you very much for the important questions. If we look at the context of Bangladesh, we know that the communities are already experiencing the impacts of climate change, whether it is cyclone or flooding or salinity intrusion, excess rainfall with short duration or environmental degradation, heat and cold wave. These challenges are not abstract. The directly affected people's livelihood, food security, health, and overall resilience. So, for the Bangladesh Red Crescent Society, the idea behind the green response approaches is actually quite simple, but very important. It means that when we respond to humanitarian needs, we aim to serve lives and reduce suffering without creating additional harm to the environment or the future resilience communities. In the past, humanitarian response understandably focused on the speed and scale, delivering relief items, water, shelter, and other life-saving support as quickly as possible. But over time, we also realized that some response activities can unintentionally create environmental pressure. For example, through plastic waste, unsustainable materials, or excessive use of natural resources. So the green response approach helps us to rethink how we deliver humanitarian assistance. For example, in some of our projects, we now using environmental screening tools such as Net Plus before implementing. These help us ideally potential environmental risk early and then adjust the design of activities so they are more sustainable and responsible. We are also introducing more environmentally responsible practices in our operations. During the cyclone Remal response, for example, plastic packaging was replaced with more environmentally friendly alternative in several locations. We are also exploring solutions like water trailers for emergency water distribution, which help reduce the reliance on single use of plastic bottle. In larger operations such as Rohingya response, we are implementing green initiative, including nature-based slope protection, rainwater harvesting, solar-powered water system, and improved waste management. In some urban projects, we are promoting integrated waste management through material recovery facility center, a biosoil to reduce water logging, solar street lighting, and homestead gardening using compost fertilizer. These initiatives not only to reduce environmental impacts but also help strengthening communities' resilience to climate risk. And this is exactly where green response connected directly with climate adaptation and resilience building. When we protect ecosystem, when we improve waste management, when we promote renewable energy and sustainable use of resources, we are not only responding to today's humanitarian needs, we are also reducing future risk and strengthening communities' ability to cope with climate shocks. Recognizing this importance, Bangladesh Red Crescent Society adopted its green response policy in 2025, which aims to integrate environmental sustainability across all phases of humanitarian work, from preparedness and response to recovery and organization operations. The policy focus on reducing environmental footprint, strengthening climate adaptation capacity, and promoting sustainable solutions across our programs and operations. Now, if I may conclude with a few key messages. First, long-term and predictable funding is essential. Many green solutions such as renewable energy systems, nature-based infrastructure, or sustainable waste management, it's required time to demonstrate their full benefits. Secondly, we strongly encouraged collaboration with universities, research institutions, local governments, and the technical partners of think tank. These will help generative evidence, support innovation, and allow us to properly evaluate the impact of humanitarian solutions. And third one, continued investment in capacity building for youth, staffs, and also partners. And coordination is very important to help humanitarian organizations integrating green response across different sectors. So summary, green response is not additional activity. this different way to deliver humanitarian assistance, a way that allows us to respond to urgent needs today, while also protecting the environment and strengthening resilience for tomorrow. And with contributed support and partnership, we believe this approach can significantly contribute to building more climate resilient and environmentally responsible humanitarian systems. Thank you. That's from my end.
Thank you very much, Uddin. That was also a great account. And as I said, based on a lot of first-hand experience. Could you say just a short word about how do you see the trade-offs when it comes to greening the response, and notably the costs associated? Are you today in a position to scale up, your green response actions and practices to what everything the Bangladesh Red Crescent does, or are you limited in the availability of means or technical assistance or other aspects?
Thank you. Actually, the purchasing time, we may changing our policy, especially for our logistic departments. There are some criteria for emergency responses cases. Some cases we selected the vendors. They are categories, and they maybe supply the items or goods to use environment friendly packaging. Also distribution times, we follow these things. And I already give my give an example. Previously, we distributed the water bottle, but now we make it a water trailer. So this kind of initiative we already taken to reduce the climatic impact, and also to increase our approaches to impact the climate as positive.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. That's great, and I'm sure there'll be questions later in the discussion. And I'll turn now to Julia Stewart-David in Brussels, so climate advisor of the General Director of ECHO. So ECHO has had pretty much a leading role in the donor community over the last few years in in contributing to a change of mindset and practices, whether it's through the minimum environmental requirements, whether it's also the high-level group on supply chains, on greening humanitarian supply chains. And what I'd like to hear from you, Julia, you've been following this for quite some time now. So where do you see, impact, and how far, to what extent do you think that it's actually leading a change of practices, and what more needs to take place to really, root it and ground it firmly in the humanitarian sector? And finally, how will the DG ECHO actually support this transformation in a context where, as we've said, limited resources, multiple crises, sometimes conflict of priorities? So basically, will you hold the course, Julia? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bruno, and good morning still, colleagues in Geneva at least, and greetings to all those online. So I'm going to start with the last point, the context, and I'm probably preaching to a room of converts when it comes to climate. But as well as being a representative of one of the largest humanitarian donors, I also sit here as a representative of the European Union. So first things first, let's not pander to misinformation or to denial. We are seeing the climate emergency very present worldwide, and we are reaching a critical situation of no return for humanity. And so as humanitarians, we very much need to be on the very front line of championing action, both to mitigate climate change at all levels and, of course, to cope with those consequences. So we need to adapt rapidly and efficiently. And for the European Commission, DG ECHO, and I heard it earlier from André, from our colleague at ACTED, climate and environmental action are not separate from the humanitarian agenda, nor are they an afterthought, nor are they a checkbox exercise. It's about how we build this in to humanitarian financing, design of action, both locally and internationally. And I wanted maybe to also thread over to the current context of the humanitarian reset specifically, to say that it very much does need to be a green humanitarian reset fit for these climate challenges. So I am starting with that because this clear political signal, I think, is extremely important at all levels. And I heard the subtle example earlier. I'm not sure if it was ECHO or another donor that was being pointed to, but we do, of course, need consistency across the programming, across the globe, across all our levels, and I'll come on to that. But thank you in particular for highlighting the minimal environmental requirements. This was a big shift for ECHO. It took a lot of doing in partnership. And indeed, we are really starting to see the impact of that. Notably, year on year, we're seeing a steady increase in the inclusion of the environmental dimension in both funding proposals and selected funding proposals. So we heard it earlier from the introduction from Bruno. One of the roles that the donors can have is to provide both incentives and requirements, but of course the financial support needs to come with it. We heard it mentioned earlier. We've seen a real change, particularly with the take-up of the NEAT Plus tool. So I think somebody put that in the chat. This is the Nexus Environmental Assessment tool, for those who don't know. It's mandatory environmental screenings in the wash and shelter projects in particular. For us, this is an example of the capacity that was already highlighted earlier, the capacity support that's needed in the system. And in this case, we provide this through funding particular trainings. These are elements that enable change to happen. I heard the examples earlier of the visible cost savings from solar power. I mean, probably not the day that I need to talk about the impact of changing energy costs globally. Very much the obsession of the high political leadership in the European Union at the moment, as elsewhere. And we're already seeing and projecting the potential impact of the old fuel-heavy dependent systems on our ability to provide basic life-saving assistance. So very, very clear that we're starting to see those savings coming through. And one point I would really like to highlight is that we're seeing these environmental considerations even in the most challenging of contexts from our partners. And I think this is maybe, we've been in these kind of discussions for a few years now, and one of the questions we were constantly getting was, is this possible in the most difficult contexts? And we are seeing that happening. There's an empowerment, a certain strength coming from the knowledge that others are also acting on these minimal environmental requirements. And also because that they know that their proposals are likely to get a favourable response when it comes to funding allocations. I hope I'm going to get all of the questions, but I wanted to point to improved donor coordination. There has been very specific action from the donors, and we'll hear shortly from our dear friends in Swiss Development Corporation. And we have come to some common priority actions that very much align to this agenda that you outlined at the beginning, so that we can make sure that we get as much consistency as possible between the donors who are backing the greening of humanitarian aid. I think this is an important signal. We're always very open to hearing back where we are inconsistent. It's important, I think, to have this big political and headquarter endorsement to make sure that's filtering through to all levels of project funding, particularly with our ever more localized funding. You asked about transformation. Yes, we keep working. The context is very hard. 34% reduction overall in humanitarian aid last year compared to the year before. Team Europe is still there with €8 billion of humanitarian aid last year, with nearly 2 billion of that from DG ECHO. And within that, we need to look at how the aid is being delivered, and we're still, you mentioned it earlier, we've been working extremely hard in partnership with the big both humanitarian partners and donors on the greening of the logistics and the supply chain. It was one of your top asks from the Climate Action Accelerator. We see this as one of the areas where 60 to 80% of the operations and the humanitarian spending, one of those which can generate the most cost savings and make assistance the most sustainable. So it's a question of quality, efficiency, and greening coming together. Things have moved on very rapidly in terms of looking at the old system, the overlaps, the duplications, and so on. And we are looking to leverage collective work on supply chains. Through this high-level group on supply chains, we have both come to an agreement on a way to transform to a new model, and ECHO will back that both with its policy voice, its own operations, direct operations, and financial support through the strategic supply chain humanitarian implementation plan, as we call it. So continued support from ECHO for a key range of enabling systems, not only in this area, but through our innovation funds, which are called the Enhanced Response Capacity Funding. Here is where we build that capacity part, which was mentioned as vital for continuing the change. And finally, we're actually, it's a little bit early for this session in some ways, in that we're actually just finishing an evaluation of the first couple of years of the minimum environmental requirements and the greening policy. And so we're going to obviously look very carefully and closely into those recommendations and look at consistency where we can. We'll continue on our donor coordination, of course, and the ending point that I would like to mention now and leave time for some questions is that I want to just come back to that bigger picture. While a humanitarian reset clearly has sharpened focus and prioritization towards life-saving needs, the EU's humanitarian budget stays steady and is very much a budget which supports the greening of humanitarian aid. I heard it earlier, but we need to say it again. We're going to stay the course. You asked the question. We're going to stay the course. We're going to stay reliable, predictable, and a principled donor. And we are aiming to make sure that public funds for humanitarian action are used in smarter and more climate-informed way. Thank you.
So thank you, Julia, and thank you also for the clarity of the message. And I think predictability and holding the course in this field is extremely important. It's also an important signal to all your partners and for the years to come. And I think it's also influential on the donor community. So as Samantha wrote in her little message, what we'll do is we'll do a little pause to take, if there are a few, questions or inputs from the audience before moving on to our two next speakers. So please go ahead. Here it is. So if you can just introduce yourself and please go ahead.
Hi, so my name is Fiona, and I am actually the co-facilitator of the aforementioned donor greening group. So yeah, just a big shout out to the wonderful members of our group, including Julia's colleague from DG ECHO and Alex, who is sitting there on the panel. Yeah, so I just wanted to go back a bit to this idea about incentives and requirements. So obviously, you know, we agree with that, and we've seen, like Julia mentioned, really the benefit of the minimum environmental requirements, and that's been really a pioneering piece of work in pushing organisations to adopt greener approaches. And you know, we certainly believe in that in our group. My question is, with the reset, we're hearing a lot that now we should really be pushing for pooled funds, because obviously, you know, rapid, flexible. But I'm just wondering, in that, what capacity do we have to put in place things like requirements? Because not only are they multi-donor, and whilst we are trying to align among donors, not all donors have the same approach to greening and to requirements, but also because when we put them into the pool, from what I understand, we don't know if they're going to UN, to Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, local international actors. So with that in mind, how do we still maintain this approach to incentivize, put in place requirements, provide financial support, and the capacity building, this kind of three-tiered approach? Is it compatible with the reset? And if not, what can we do, you know, with our colleagues here from UNOCHA, what can we do to kind of push for that? Thanks. I hope my question was clear. It made sense in my head, at least.
I think you underline, you know, a very important challenge, which is, you know, beyond the intention. How do you actually really integrate it into other approaches like pool funding, which are actually usually non-specific and which try to combine, you know, the multiple ambitions of many donors. And how do you bring in the common denominator in the approach? So I think that can be an interesting question. Maybe that Daniel, you'll be maybe happy to take into account into your intervention later, because I think you have also one of the global views. I don't know if Julia, do you want to say a word on this, or Alexandra, please?
I'm happy to come in briefly, although I think it would be fair probably to hear from Daniel first on pooled funds. But just from an ECHO perspective, thank you very much, Fiona, for the question. And I can't see you, but it's good to hear you. I mean, we look very carefully at country-based pool funding, and we look at it context by context. They're very variable in how well they're functioning and operating. I mean, to be blunt, ECHO has the advantage of a donor of having a very big field presence and a very expert field presence. So, I mean, let's start with point number one, that country-based pool funding needs to be humanitarianly principled already. And yes, we would expect that they are managed in such a way that both environmental aspects and elements such as sexual and reproductive health are able to be covered. It's a tricky discussion at the moment, and I know that, and so not to put anyone on the spot, but very much one which is in our attention zone. Thank you.
Alexandra, do you want to come in?
Maybe just very quickly. Yes, you know, I was here for the last 2 days at the HMPW, and I mean, I attended all, I mean, no, I could not attend all the sessions around climate and environment, but I think this was a question which came out very clearly. How can we ensure basically that climate and environment is considered in the humanitarian coordination system on the ground, which obviously includes country-based pool funds and so on. But I think this is still something we really also need to find answers. You know, how can we do this in a practical and locally adapted way?
Okay, great. So yeah, and we'll maybe hear Daniel later on this issue. But I mean, whether it's pool funds or single donor programmatic approaches, I think there's still a lot of space for you know, voluntary donors to actually be exemplary in the way they program funds and integrate criteria for this, and probably changing pool funding practices implies that some donors are already championing this in their own review of projects. Maybe other questions? Maybe we can take one more, please.
Thank you. Yeah, good morning. I'm not sorry, good afternoon, actually. Sorry about my timing. It's morning. Anyways, my name is Cynthia, and I work with LM International. Our organization is actually also it's quite a global faith-based organization, but responsible for providing also essential services to some of the countries that we work. We're also a partner to DG ECHO, and I'm very grateful to see Julia on the panel today. But my question is, and to you, for the mention about partnerships, models, and as someone with a couple of operations in the Global South, I was just wondering, particularly around best practices, to get more of the local organizations to, sort of comply with some of these practices, because what we have seen practically in experience is many of them consider this maybe too high level. There is also the aspects also about speaking the language or the local sensitive language that can get them to understand and internalize these practices. But looking to members of the panel for great best practice approaches or best examples that can exemplify good partnership models to encourage local partner organizations to embed or internalize these processes, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that's it's a very important point. I mean, I think it also makes the case for more widely shared repository of successful experiences coming from all over the place. I've been often very positively impressed by some of the practices from actually local organizations and national organizations in this field, and not necessarily for greening reasons, but actually which do integrate more sustainable practices. And yeah, so what I propose is maybe from there to give the floor to Alexandra from the Swiss Development and Cooperation Agency. So the climate and environment are a pillar of the strategy of the SDC. And the SDC has been supporting already consistently for several years an evolution of practices in the sector, in this ground. So I'd like to ask you, practically, what would you like to see more happening in the field and on the ground? And so what do you expect to happen, and what would you want to support more to actually achieve impact? And also, could you speak, yourself as an expert? Where do you see also, well, the benefits and the co-benefits of integrating climate and environment in practical assistance? Please.
So if you may allow me, sorry, I cannot look at you at the same time, speak in the micro. So if you may allow me to come back to yesterday's session around the Green Reset, we had our ambassador Dominic Stillhart as one of the keynote, or as the keynote speaker. He's basically the delegate of Humanitarian Aid of Switzerland and the Deputy Director General of the Swiss Development Cooperation Agency. So he was basically starting with saying, we are kind of in a paradox situation between these reduced resources, increasing needs, so that we have this prioritization and shift to life-saving assistance, while at the same time we are kind of requested to invest more in prevention, preparedness and anticipatory action. So should we do this? Does this make sense? And I would say from SDC side, yes, the answer is very clear. Yes. So Bruno has basically mentioned it. Switzerland has invested in disaster risk reduction, climate and environment for a very long time. And for us, it's really about sustainable response and about good quality. And also we think that, again, increasing people's resilience makes sense in the long term, because we all know there is a lot of cost saving in the bucket if we invest more in prevention and preparedness. So basically back to the question which Bruno asks me about, like what we would like our partners more to do is like, I mean, Julia mentioned, like as part of the greening donor group, I mean, Switzerland also has committed to this 10 priority action, which should simplify it for our partners to basically implement the charter recommendations. I mean, the Climate and Environment Charter for humanitarian organizations, which actually SDC assigned us the first supporter on our minister level. And we have also signed basically the Declaration of Humanitarian Donors on Climate and Environment. I think which shows really the clear commitment of Switzerland to this topic. So obviously, as I said, like we would like our partners to consider environment and climate through the charter commitments, but also the and priority actions which have been drafted by the Greening Donor Group. And we have had for a very long time this environment assessment tool. I mean, it's not only environment, it's DRR, environment and climate, called CEDRIC, maybe some of you know it, which we are very much promoting with our partners, with trainings, workshops, and so on. But I think in the end, what we, at the very least, what we expect and what we need to do is at least do no harm. And I think an important point is also that we should stop seeing it as an additional burden, like to work on climate and environment, It's really, I think, about doing what we do good, in a good way and in a sustainable way with a good quality. And I think, like just to give one example, I mean, I don't want to make too many examples because we have heard excellent examples from my colleagues. I mean, if you think about energy efficiency, I mean, this is, like such a huge win if we invest in energy efficiency. It's good for the environment and climate, but I mean, it's also it has a huge cost-saving potential. So maybe now I was talking about, like the partners, but I think also as a donor community, I think we need to ask ourselves, what should we expect of ourselves? So for example, when it comes to investment, I think we should more invest into maybe activities which are more sustainable and more environmentally friendly and climate smart, which might have higher implementation costs at the beginning, but are in the end cheaper, like in the midterm or long term. I mean, typical example, instead of financing water trucking for years, maybe investing in a water borehole, which we know, like over time, it's cheaper. I mean, obviously, if it's feasible, in a certain location, in a certain area. So again, like it's not something additional, in my opinion, it's about good programming. And we all know, I mean, we have heard it from colleagues, I mean, it's more cost efficient, it has a better impact. Yes. So maybe what I would highlight, and what was also one of the questions of Bruno, is the co-benefits which we see. I think, like for me, greening is really, I would say, a driver of change or a multiplier, because I think in one thing, it really promotes a new way of working, for example, through promotion of collaboration and sharing resources, joint warehouses, joint supply chains, and things like this, which obviously are to the benefit of greening, but also it costs less. I think it contributes to localization because it will trigger more local procurement, employing local actors and things like this. And maybe something which I would also like to highlight is the benefits around gender protection or also health, because climate and environment degradation is overproportionally impacting, for example, women and girls. So they will also overproportionally profit from investments in greening. And I think we all know the negative health impacts or the potential positive impacts around clean cooking, which is a huge health issue. Yes, so, and maybe just one point I think they're also very quick wins, you know, like flying less business class and things like this, which are really, I mean, extremely easy to achieve. And as a last point, I think it's about doing better with less, even if this sounds a bit strange, but it's really about the good quality, I think, what we do. And in the end, for me, investing in greening is a smart answer to less resources.
So thank you, Alexandra. I'll just ask you a follow-up question. So you're extremely clear on why it should be done, basically, and what you should aim for. So on the other hand, we all know it's not an easy transition. It's not an easy transformation. So what would you see as key enablers to be worked on to actually make it happen at scale? If anything, or you can also take the time to think about it and come back later if it's too.
I mean, just as a first reaction, I think it's not such an easy question, to be honest. But I think there needs to be commitment from all of us, from the partners who are implementing projects, who are designing projects, but obviously also from the donors. I think also, I mean, as I said, you know, like being prepared or being willing to invest in greener, more sustainable solutions, longer program financing, because this is another problem, you know, like if the financing is only guaranteed for maybe 1 year, which is the case, as I know, for some donors, I mean, it's very difficult, you know, like to basically implement and come up with more sustainable solution. Or, I mean, I'm sure this was not, you know, like a complete answer to this complex question, but I hope it's at least the start of an answer. Over.
Thank you. So now I'll turn myself to Daniel Pfister from the climate team in UNOCHA. So working on anticipatory action, financing, strategy and analysis on basically notably integrating the climate issue into humanitarian assistance. So you have a very good overview of the whole sector and maybe initiatives in this area. You're also connected to the Humanitarian Reset discussions. So I'd like to ask you basically, I mean, hearing the discussions today, those yesterday, those today, where do you see, the key avenues to actually be effective in this transformation? I think we've heard from everybody that it's not only it's feasible in the field, but it's also often comes with high levels of benefit and affordability. So where do you see, the next steps from the point of view of UNOCHA? And what are the basically necessary conditions to make it happen?
How much time do I have?
Well, the floor is yours.
I don't have a microphone, so I don't.
Oh,
no.
Usually.
Thank you. Well, that's quite a bit. I prepared something and then I rewrote it and then I rewrote it again while sitting here. Maybe a few things at the outset, and then I'm going to say what we're doing on different functions for UNOCHA. So at the outset, you have in front of you a guy who works in financing. So a lot of the things, like a lot of the ways that I look at problems is through a money lens in the humanitarian sector. So, you know, if you had one of our planning colleagues, you probably would get slightly different answers, or if you know, depending on that. So just take that as your grain of salt. You know, the Humanitarian Reset, yes, it includes this work stream 25 from greening and anticipatory action, humanitarian sector. So that is a manifestation of a process, right? It's a process answer to a question, so that we have to come up with recommendations for our organizations in this space, and we will do that. I can speak to that for a long time. I think what Tom Fletcher asks us to do, and what he has said over and over again, is that, you know, while we're dealing with the current problems, we also need to think about the future. It's just always a balance of how much energy you invest in all that. And for him, this greening question is part of what he calls a radical renewal of the entire sector, right? He often says by 2030, he wants to see a greener, more preventative or anticipatory, more localized, etc., humanitarian community. So that's part of that. But I also want to acknowledge at the same time, this is just not, it's not just a zero starting point endeavor. This is an endeavor that rests on the work that most of you have done for a very long time already, right? Alexandra, you just mentioned a few tools that already exist, right? There's the charter and there's the priority actions, there's Need Plus that Julia mentioned, Cedric that you mentioned. There's a lot of tools, the mechanics of it, a lot of it already exists. And then André mentioned a lot of things, and the colleague from Bangladesh mentioned a lot of things that is already being done. So I'm just trying to be more hopeful that this is not a zero starting point exercise. And also just thank you for the work that you've done over the past year, so that whatever follows next can, you know, stand on the proverbial shoulders of giants, you. Thanks. That's the first thing I want to say. The second thing I want to say is why we at UNOCHA, or at least in our team, want to do this. And a lot of things have been mentioned, you know, it's cheaper, it's better for the environment, it's better for the planet, it's better for people. And I think for us, that last piece is the most important piece, as from the humanitarian tradition. It is effective and efficient for people. I know we're overusing the solarification examples, but Tom Fletcher comes back from these field missions. He goes into the, I don't know, the boons of Afghanistan. I remember he went to Afghanistan, he comes back to our team and says, they all want solar panels. That's all they want. That's what they want. And they want that because it's basically energy independence, right? Which we all want. I want energy independence. I want solar panels on my roof so I don't have to go to the gas pump. It's a human condition. I'm just mentioning that one example to just demonstrate that it actually matters to people, right? And we all want that. I forget, Julia mentioned, you know, this is the preoccupation of our senior leadership, the political leadership. They're, oh, no, I wouldn't sleep a second right now. And just looked at the oil price; it's above 100. And, you know, you can just, everybody can just percolate this through. Society will impact all of us. If we had invested in solarification and a more decentralized energy system globally, this will not be such a big problem. I mean, it is a problem, but you know what I mean. So anyway, so we're doing this because of people. Yes, the cost effectiveness is a huge argument of this. That's why we're allowed to do it, right? If it costs a lot more, we will probably not be as much allowed to do it. But because we can demonstrate the cost effectiveness over time, we're allowed to do it. So that's just kind of framing. Then I want to say two things about what we're doing. UNOCHA is a weird actor, right? We're weird in the sense that we are paid to coordinate a system that's kind of bonkers. Nobody will create a humanitarian system today the way it is. But we're here to coordinate, which also means that we actually don't really carry out activities, right? We don't really deliver tangible things to people. All right, so we internally, you know, we do what most others do, right? We're very committed to environmental standards. We have the Greening the Blue in the UN. We're part of that. UNOCHA is part of a bigger UN entity, which is called the Secretariat. We do have our environmental management systems in 2024, as well as the inventory, part of the processes of reducing our own footprint. And before walking in here, I was looking at the Greening the Blue. So that's the whole UN. It covers, or it used to cover, and the latest data is end of 2024. It covered 310,000 people, like employees and staff, consultants, etc. That's a lot. But the trend line is clear. So less CO2 output over the last 5 years, or from 2019 to 2024, less waste. So on the key metrics, we're seeing progress. Again, I think this is a hopeful message. We're not reversing. It's actually a hopeful message. The trajectory is the right direction. So we're doing all of that. But UNOCHA has also functioned into the humanitarian sector. So what are we doing in this space? We're part of the conversations around, what we talked about today, the charter, all of these processes that we're part of. But I want to highlight a few things because I'm looking at the world through the lens of money. And it is about incentivizing better action. So it's Alexandra, you said doing more with less. It's just better programming. And how can we incentivize that? So we have a few things that we're trying to do. One is we're doing anticipatory action. I guess it's just the sharp end of the stick. So, we didn't mitigate the problem, so we're facing the problem. We're having all these climate disasters. We're trying to act ahead of it, and by doing that, we're helping people to, withstand the climate shocks that happen in a much better way. And the evidence is undeniable, and we're trying to do that more and more with our colleagues. So that's the first thing. The second thing that we do is we have something called the Climate Action Account, where we're specifically incentivizing life-saving humanitarian action that also builds resilience against climate shocks. We're doing that. We've done this now in, I think, 18 countries over the last 2 years. We've tried this out. And I think the lessons learned from that is it is possible to do these type of climate adaptation activities together with life-saving with humanitarian activities in the most fragile places on the planet, right? If we can do it in besieged areas in Burkina Faso, or we can do it in Cité Soleil in Haiti, we can do it everywhere. So we're trying to do proof of concept. We're trying to de-risk it for other investors to serve. And our pool funds, they deal with these types of risk every day. Other money looks at this problem and says, this is too risky for us. But if we can manage to provide examples where it's possible, it de-risks it for others. We're seeing these benefits already. You mentioned the Green Climate Fund has come into some of these projects. They saw we did it, and the Green Climate Fund said, okay, we're going to come in behind and make this a more sustainable investment. So that's one of the things. So we're de-risking essentially. But we're trying to also put in place incentive structures for more than that. We're looking right now at trying to think about, okay, so humanitarian money has great qualities. It's usually quick, it's relatively fast. It is relatively little strings attached, right? And that's good, but it's also extremely short term. Alexandra, you mentioned it's 1 year contracts, 1 year contracts, 1 year contracts. If you get a 3-year contract right now in the current funding situation, you're extremely lucky and well done. But we're trying to figure out, could we calculate, so again, solar as an example, okay, so a diesel generator costs you $5,000, I don't know, $5,000 to procure. A solar system costs you $20,000, right? Over 5 years, the solar is cheaper than the diesel, at least. So can we make up that difference to help the ones that do want to do solarification? Can we make that distance? Can we make up that distance? So then in your 1 year project proposal, we can actually cover the difference, because we do know in the long term it makes sense. You can spin that out for other of these things as well. In our pool funds, by the way, too, because it was mentioned, I'm not saying that just because I do work for UNOCHA, I do, so I have to say it, but I also say it because I believe in it. I do believe that pool funds are the best, most flexible, quickest funding available for most of us. Whether that's your own internal pool funds or global pool funds, it's another question. But pool funds are extremely responsive, and they're humanitarian, that's why. But we have inbuilt capacity to do more on the topics that we discussed today. So I was just looking at our guidelines, our global guidelines. They're relatively short, to be honest, on environmental issues, but they do include entire questions about do no harm, about risk management. But then if you go into the country level guidance documents, you do see a little bit more uptake on waste management, on energy, on all of that. Again, it's a journey. it's a journey, and we should stand behind the things in the humanitarian system that work and have proven themselves, and try to shape them in ways that create incentives for all of us to do better.
So thank you very much, Daniel. I'll probably now just give the floor to the audience, whether online or in the room. If there are any, follow-up comments, inputs, or questions to our panelists, we've seen very different perspectives. I mean, complementary perspectives. So please come in. Yep. Do you want to? So I think the micro is. If you can pass the micro. Do we?
Hi, my name is Julie Barra. I used to work for the Global WASH cluster until 2 months ago. Just have a quick question about green climate funds or adaptation funds. How could humanitarian intervention access those funding? It seems like it's really detached, and I know it's more bilateral and probably development, but in the constrained funding environment, we always say, oh, humanitarians have to leverage climate funding, but that's all, yeah, very superficial for now. So I was wondering if practically this was doable and how. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll basically give the floor to André, because Acted has worked a lot on this, but I'd also like to give the floor just afterwards to maybe Mosleh Uddin from Bangladesh to say if they are connected or able to tap in this source of funding. Thank you.
It's a good question. It's a tricky one with I think with a long answer, but I try to be very short. I mean, it's complicated. It's a total different mechanism. It's highly bureaucratic. And we already in the humanitarian system, right, have to fight bureaucracy. There it's even more. I think the key is we can't just use this funding to retrofit humanitarian programs. This wouldn't work. That's not what they are looking for. That's not the scope of Green Climate Fund, because that's really about mitigation and adaptation. But I think the key point is here to mix and match, right? We enacted. We're not only a humanitarian actor, and the idea is really in the areas we work, we try to mix and match different types of funding and funding sources to make. Basically, if there is a shortfall in humanitarian funding or we can't cover all of the needs, we'll bring in other sources. So I think this is the way to go. Of course, the accreditation is extremely complicated. It's extremely long. They have the GCF has revised the accreditation framework, so maybe it's getting faster. There are a lot of UN agencies that have access already and that do sometimes channel through some of these funding to NGOs and humanitarian operators, but I don't think that's necessarily a long-term solution. But yeah, I don't have a very good answer other than that it's very complicated and bureaucratic.
But you managed.
We managed, yeah. But it took 3 years. Yeah, it was a 3 years process.
Mosleh Uddin, would you like to add maybe your insights on the question?
Yeah, thank you, Bruno. Actually, we have till now not receiving that types of fund from especially Green Climate Fund or other things. But we are receiving some of our PNS partners of national societies different program or project fund, and we introducing the green response policy and others practicing climate adapted options or NBS nature-based solution we introducing in our some of projects. So BDRCS, I think BDRCS have ability to do these things. So we hope Acted or others donor agencies give the chance to us to submit these types of projects proposal, and makes it easier to get the fund. These are from us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other sorry, please
Yes.
go ahead. Online, do we have? Okay. Please.
Hi. Yeah, my name is Johanna. I'm seconded to IFRC from STC at the moment, and I'm a climate and environment advisor. I have a bit more of a concrete, pragmatic question. So we spoke a lot about promoting renewable energy and the benefits of solar energy, which are quite obvious. But I'm missing out a little bit on one point. And we spoke also a lot about do no harm and prevention and sustainability, but I hear very little about what's going to happen to the disposal of all those solar panels. I think it's going to be an issue at some stage. I mean, not now, probably not in the coming years, but we've seen such a scale up in these projects, and there are very little disposal solutions for it. And I think that's a complex problem and requires a lot of collaboration from various partners at various levels to promote sustainable disposal solutions. I have heard not much about e-waste problem solutions, but I think given the rather slow dynamics of finding solutions for people in the field at different country levels, we should start talking about this as well when we promote those programs, shouldn't we? So I would be really keen to hear more on this. I have spoken to numbers of partners, but there were not many options that I could advise countries on what to do with these panels once they expire. I'm aware they have a long lifespan, but at some stage they're gonna reach their end. And what do we do then? So I would really like to hear more about this because that's not really tackled a lot. Thank you.
So thanks very much. This is so it's clearly a very important issue. I think in general, the question of recycling of waste in all the different waste productions, whether it's electronic waste, whether it's solar panels, but also plastic waste and all the rest is very important. I don't know if somebody wants to take the floor here in the panel on these questions. Is there anybody in particular?
If no one, I can just, if I may, sorry. Yes, of course, I think it's a very important issue. However, you know, the issue of the end of life of generators that are used throughout the field, we've got, I don't know, 100,000 generators according to a latest GPA study, is the same. You know, there is an issue of the end of life of generators, so which is not less, not, you know, it's as harmful as solar power. I mean, we'll have to do a life cycle assessment, but, you know, I think that shouldn't be an obstacle, I think, for the transition. Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't provide an answer, but it's just a reflection.
Sure.
Like I said, yeah.
I think, so first of all, I think there are today some organizations which are specializing in trying to identify, you know, recycling options in countries of operation for humanitarians. But of course, I mean, they're focusing first on indeed the general waste which is produced. First of all, plastics, which is absolutely enormous, electronic waste, you know, oils and toxic waste and all the rest. I mean, you talked about generators. There's also cold chains with the gases, which are extremely potent on climate, etc. So I would say solar panels is one of the challenges among many, many, many others that need to be addressed. And often it's true, humanitarians rely on what's happening in a country itself, and yeah, it's part of the challenges. And there's but it's probably not specific to solar panels. It's one among many others. Wait, I'll just, sorry, we have one question online that I think we should take now, and then we'll go back here.
So it's a question from Nora from the REC to SDC and ECHO on the upfront investment that is needed to fund solarization projects. But I think also André might have some insights into how you've managed acted to fund the solarization of our offices. So I'll let you, I don't know, either Alex, Julia, or André.
Julia, you want to go first or shall I? I think it depends, let's say it like this. As I said, I mean, Switzerland was one of the donors who was willing, you know, like in long-term solution. I mean, I think also we can fund projects, you know, like longer than probably other donors. So I think for projects, greening activities or whatever, I think we're open now. We invested a lot, for example, in borehole solarization and things like this for many years. But I think what is probably still in discussion also internally, how we should deal with solarization of partners' own premises, you know, like, for example, solar panels for offices and things like this. So there are colleagues who think, you know, like this should really be covered through the core contribution which is given to our main partners. And then on the other side, yes, I mean, how can we realize this, you know, like in a kind of joint effort? So, I mean, STC has financed a pilot project with the ICRC. It's called the Climate and Environment Trust Fund, which had first and foremost the objective of basically greening ICRC's own premises. But this was really meant, you know, like as a seed funding for pushing for this type of activities. But I think it's still, I mean, it's still not clear, to be frank. Over.
Maybe just jump in here. Yeah, I agree. I think on the project side, I think we are now, and the example you gave about the generator and the cost, I think we are over it now, and I think most donors have understood this. On the premises, the way we have been doing is through a rental or amortization system. So it's an upfront investment. And then, you know, okay, I simplify, but you know that maybe in this space, normally you would have charged $200 per month for generator and generator fuel. Now you have a fully solarized system. You charge the equivalent over a certain period of time and then amortize basically the initial investment. It works with some donors, not with all donors, but by and large, that's the way you could do it. I think there are other ways as well, but yeah, that's how we have been doing it.
Okay, thank you. Maybe just a last short question, and then we'll basically do a little wrap up and close. Thank you.
Hello? There we go. Sorry, I'm just looping back on the solar panel point that was mentioned just a second ago, because I know my colleague Feline is connected remotely and she'd want me to jump in, because I'm from HULO, the Humanitarian Logistics Cooperative, and one of the challenges that has been mentioned a lot by our colleagues in the field is this challenge of e-waste with solar panels, but other kinds of dangerous waste as well. And it's been challenging for us in our environmental initiatives also to identify recyclers and suppliers in the field. So one way that we found that can help, it doesn't work in every country and not in every single context, but jointly identifying suppliers together, working with groups of like-minded humanitarians who are looking for solutions to problems like solar panel recycling in the long term can be a really helpful way to approach the problem.
Okay, so thank you very much. So this session is coming to an end. So I think it was a very rich exchange with different levels of action, different insights. I just want to personally, I measure the progress on these issues over the years because I think 2-3 years ago there was still strong perceptions, is all of this affordable? Is it actually, can we choose to prioritize this over humanitarian assistance to people, etc.? And what I see, and it's actually quite comforting, is the terms of the debate have actually changed quite profoundly. I think there's quite a good consensus today to say that actually it's not one against the other, but that you can actually be serve better the needs of the population while implementing these ambitions. Of course, this is not a representative group. It's a group of people who are already working on this issue, who are relatively convinced. And I think a big part of the challenge is how do you mainstream it, and how do you bring it at scale? And here, as it's been said on several occasions, of course, it needs the partners, the humanitarian actors themselves, but it needs fundamentally better programming, as it's been said, and really integrating these incentives and requirements all along the chain of funding and programming if we want to reach scale. So thanks for having joined us, and I hope this was useful, and welcome also if you want to contact us and the panelists afterwards. Thank you.